In 1953, Elizabeth Windsor knelt before the altar and swore to govern by the laws and customs of her realms. The oath was public, the cost settled into private life. From that moment, the office had a claim on her before anything else did. Princess Margaret stood inside the same royal world, though never in the same position. She had the title, the palace rooms, the photographers, the rules, and the scrutiny. She did not have the throne, the one role that made Elizabeth's restraint appear not only expected, but necessary. That imbalance shaped what followed. Elizabeth became the image of steadiness, formal portraits, measured appearances, silence under pressure. Margaret took on a more volatile place in the public imagination. Beauty, smoke, late nights, sharp wit, and a visible impatience with the limits around her. From the outside, the story could be flattened into two parts: a dutiful queen and a younger sister becoming a public problem. Inside the monarchy, the danger was larger. In an ordinary family, a sister's choices might cause anger or distance. In this family, the same choices could involve courtiers, ministers, public funding, and the reputation of the crown itself. Every time Margaret reached for freedom, the palace had to judge whether the moment would remain private or turn into public damage. A dinner, a holiday, a romance, a photograph, any of them could pass from family life into the national conversation. Margaret's rebellion, then, was never only a matter of bad behavior, nor was Elizabeth's restraint simply a refusal to forgive. They were sisters caught in different forms of duty, one sworn to protect the monarchy, the other close enough to be controlled by it, but too far from power to shape it. Margaret's rebellion began inside that imbalance, where Elizabeth's duty so often meant containing the person she had once known simply as her sister. The first real fracture came with Peter Townsend. By the mid-1950s, Margaret wanted to marry him. The obstacle was not only personal disapproval. Townsend was divorced, and for a royal family tied to the church, government, precedent, and public example, the proposed marriage became a constitutional problem as much as a romantic one. Margaret was asking the system to treat her desire as her own. The system was built to weigh her wishes against the crown and, in most cases, override them. A royal marriage carried public meaning, so the palace judged it through institutional need before it judged it through the feelings of the people involved. The refusal mattered because it showed Margaret how far the rules could reach. Even her most human decision could be taken from her by forces she did not control. She was close enough to the throne for her private life to matter, but not powerful enough to decide its terms. The palace could defend the decision as responsible. Margaret could feel it as humiliation, sacrifice, and warning all at once. This one decision does not explain everything that came later, but it made the pattern visible. Personal happiness would be weighed against institutional survival, and the institution would win. After that closed door, Margaret did not disappear into obedience. She began building another kind of life, one where glamour, company, and visibility could feel like control. Once the Townsend door closed, Margaret built a different center of gravity. At Kensington Palace, she could build a world that felt looser than the formal court around her. Friends came for dinners. Artists, musicians, designers, and society figures moved through rooms where status came not only from birth, but from wit, beauty, talent, and nerve. For Margaret, that mattered. If the palace would not give her the life she wanted, she could at least create a world that looked different from the one planned for her. She could not command Parliament, the church, or the machinery of monarchy. But she could command a room. That is why the glamour should not be treated only as decoration. The gowns, cigarettes, late nights, and polished confidence became a language of self-definition. They said, "This is the world I choose, even if the larger system still chooses for me." Her marriage to Anthony Armstrong Jones did not end that contradiction. It made her modern, fashionable, and even more visible. The wedding placed her in front of a huge public audience. But public fascination did not mean public freedom. She remained a princess, still measured against what a royal woman was supposed to be. For a time, Margaret's style made her compelling. Then the same details began to work against her. A royal who looks modern can seem exciting in one decade and indulgent in the next. The private court she built gave her identity, but it also gave critics a set of images to use. That is the turn. Margaret's social world began as an escape from palace control. Slowly, it became the evidence people used to argue that she needed more control. By the late 1970s, Margaret's image had moved out of drawing rooms and into the public record. Photographers outside restaurants and columnists in the society pages were no longer the whole problem. Public pressure had entered the story. MPs were raising questions about royal funding while Britain faced strikes, inflation, and economic strain. In that climate, royal glamour could stop looking charming and start looking remote. A long absence, an expensive holiday, a car at the palace gates, each detail could become larger than itself. The public did not need every private fact to make up its mind. It needed a pattern it thought it recognized: privilege, pleasure, and too little visible duty. For Elizabeth, that pattern was dangerous. A working royal could be defended through service, ceremony, and public obligation. A royal associated mainly with escape was harder to defend during national hardship. The Queen's options were narrow. A public rebuke would make the family fracture official and give the newspapers a royal quarrel. Silence, though, risked making the palace look as if it were shielding privilege from accountability. Protection began to look like containment. Margaret could still appear at managed royal moments. She was still family. But the space around her had to be watched more closely. Where she went, who was present, what photographers might capture, and how quickly a private story could become a political one. Elizabeth's restraint protected the dignity of the crown while forcing her to absorb the embarrassment. Margaret's freedom created the headlines. Elizabeth's silence carried the institutional weight. By this point, the palace was managing more than a passing scandal. Margaret had become a recurring liability. When she searched for privacy far beyond Britain, the same problem followed her. Then came Mustique in 1976. For Margaret, the island was supposed to offer distance, heat, privacy, easy company, and a break from London's daily choreography. Away from official rooms, she could seem less like an exhibit of monarchy and more like a woman choosing her own pleasures. The camera found her anyway. When photographs of Margaret and Roddy Llewellyn surfaced, the story changed. Atmosphere, rumor, and reputation now had an image attached. The public could look at it, newspapers could print it, critics could point to it. The private escape had become public evidence of a royal problem the palace could not fully contain. The timing made the damage worse. Margaret's marriage to Lord Snowdon was already under strain, and the Mustique coverage intensified the public fallout. What had once been managed as a difficult private life now touched the monarchy's image directly. Discretion had failed in a form everyone could see. The palace response was not a grand public defense of Margaret. It closed ranks around the institution. Containment became colder and more practical. Fewer chances for Margaret to define the story herself, more careful management, less room for sympathy to complicate the crown's judgment. Mustique became the breaking point because privacy had not protected her. It had exposed her, and the place meant to offer escape had become another stage. For Elizabeth, even an island had not kept a royal crisis from reaching the crown. After Mustique, the public noise falls away. The crown survived. The headlines moved on. The institution remained polished, careful, and intact. But Margaret's place inside it narrowed again. Survival for the monarchy did not mean healing for the people inside it. That cost sits behind every polished royal photograph, Elizabeth was not simply a cold monarch turning away from a difficult sister. Margaret was not simply a reckless princess chasing attention. They were two women trapped in roles that could not easily make room for each other. Elizabeth's role demanded steadiness. When pressure came, she protected the monarchy first because it was her oath, her office, and her life's work. Public sympathy for Margaret could never be allowed to outweigh the stability of the crown. Margaret's role was harder to define. She was royal enough to be watched, funded, judged, and restricted, but never royal enough to command the system around her. When she tried romance, the rules intervened. When she built a social world, the press turned it into a public character study. When she sought distance, the camera followed. That pattern is the clearest way to understand the sisters. Margaret pushed against boundaries because the boundaries were real. Elizabeth reinforced them because the crown depended on appearing stronger than any individual need. The tragedy is not that one sister hated the other. The record supports something more human and more painful. Duty kept winning until intimacy had less and less space to survive. A sister could feel concern, irritation, loyalty, and disappointment at once. A queen had to turn those feelings into silence, distance, or policy. In the end, Elizabeth kept the crown safe. Margaret became part of the price. And once you see that pattern here, it becomes easier to recognize it elsewhere in royal history. The moments when the monarchy preserves itself by asking the people inside it to become smaller. For more royal history told through power, betrayal, and consequence, subscribe to Palace Scandals.